Hey guys, welcome to Soul Care Saturday. I hope you guys are having a great Saturday. I know we weren't on Instagram for the past couple of weeks, but we will start to hop back on Instagram. But you can always tap in on Facebook. Hey Graham, started a little late today, but you could always join on Facebook at Soul Care Saturdays, and I'm also going to start posting some of these on YouTube as well, and I'll post a link to that too, that way you guys can watch it. So last week Taya went live from Facebook, and she was talking about faithfulness. So at this point I think we've decided just to touch on the fruits of the Spirit, and what the fruits of the Spirit are just the qualities and likeness and traits that you develop over time as you grow in your relationship with God, and as you continue to communicate with Him, and just allow Him to transform you from the inside out. So some of those topics we've talked about has been peace. We've talked about joy, and a little bit about self-control and humility, which is kind of interchangeable with meekness and self-control as well. So we've been touching on some good topics, and if you want to go back and just watch some of the things that we've been talking about, you can see the videos here on Facebook, and a couple of them here on Instagram, and a couple of them that we did on Facebook. But hey sis, so last week Taya, she talked about faithfulness, and this week I wanted to talk a little bit more about faithfulness too, because I feel like faithfulness is one of those fruits that you see represented not just in your relationship with others, but also in your relationship with God. I feel like a lot of the other fruits of the Spirit, like love and joy and peace and those things, I feel like those things are kind of reflected in the way that you treat others. But the way that I see faithfulness is that it's a direct connection to your relationship with God. So how your faithfulness is in your relationship with God is going to be, hey Paige, we're talking about faithfulness. So how your faithfulness is in your relationship with God is going to be reflected in the relationships that you have. And we see this a lot throughout the Bible. One of the main things that we see when God is speaking to His people, and one of the people that came to mind when I was studying faithfulness and thinking about, okay, how can we talk about faithfulness, was King David. And a lot of times we hear people say, King David was a man after God's own heart. But, what does that mean, and what does that look like? So recently I've been studying Kings. So I'm reading 2 Kings now, but I was reading 1 Kings before. Obviously, first comes before second. But and it's just a story about King David and pretty much that whole entire lineage. And one of the things that was noted about King David was that he was faithful. He was a faithful man. He was a servant of God. Also that he was a psalmist. So if you don't know, and if you aren't familiar, he is the person who wrote the book of Psalms. All of those Psalms are his worship and, stuff to God. But his relationship with God and him having a heart after God is a reflection of faithfulness. And that's something that was revealed to me, because I never understood what that meant. But after studying, all the different kings that came from the line of David and other kings that didn't come from the line of David, they had a problem being faithful to God. They had a problem, going after other gods. They had a problem, not sticking to the commandments and the statutes and, what God had given them. And mind you, they had already seen, miracles. They had already seen and had already had a revelation from generations of who God was. And I feel like that's something that we can just relate to in real life, because we know, some of you may be familiar with the story of King David, but we know he wasn't a perfect man. He actually, pretty much took another man's wife and had him killed. So if you haven't read the story, it's in 1 Kings, or you can just Google it. But pretty much he saw a woman that he wanted. He was king, and he's like, okay, I'm king. I can get what I want. I can have what I want. So he saw this woman, and he ended up, getting with her. And her husband was actually, one of his servants, in the army or whatever. So pretty much he had them put him on the front line, and he ended up being killed. So that was a sin that he committed. And that was one of the biggest downfalls that King David had, and he was, he did have to, I don't want to say pay for that, but he did have consequences for those actions. But the promises that God gave to him, he still did through his lineage. And I thought that was powerful, because how often do we get caught up in the sins that we do now, and in sexual sin, or whatever, anything that you may be going through, anything that you may be struggling with. Although he was, a man that was, struggled with those things and had that temptation, he was still known to be a man that was faithful to God. And if you look at some of the other kings, like for instance, Ahab, a lot of the other kings were compared to King David, and their biggest downfall was faithfulness. So I said, wow, it's crazy how, on one end we have the sin of sexual sin, and then we have the sin of, following another God. So just to show the comparison of the two, and how different they are, and how different that they can be. So I just want to encourage you, no matter, what you're going through, or what you're facing, or what you may be tempted by, know that putting your heart after God and continuing to be faithful to him is an honorable thing. And it's not something that you can't bounce back from. It's not something that you can't, continue to serve God through. And I'm not saying that, there aren't consequences to the actions that we do, because we see that there in that story as well. But it's something that I wanted to point out. Another thing I wanted to point out too, like in 1 Kings. So during that time, there were a lot of people who were worshiping Baal, which is, like a false god or whatever. So one of the biggest prophets during that time was Elijah. So he was pretty much just fed up with everyone that was, pretty much, tarnishing the name of God, and, choosing to worship another god, Baal. So what happened was, the prophet Elijah was telling them, okay, let's pretty much, he pretty much, there was a showdown. So he said, okay, let's bring 2 bulls, and, you make a sacrifice and altar, to your God, and I'll make a sacrifice and a altar to my God. And the God who answers by fire, is, the one and true God. So what ended up happening was, they prepared their altar and everything, and they're crying out to Baal, and nothing is happening. And Elijah prays, to the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob, the God of Abraham, and his altar and sacrifice was consumed. So to me, that's just like a big, just indication of faithfulness. Just having that faithfulness in God, knowing that he's going to show up. Because could you imagine, this was 450, prophets that he's going to, so imagine going up against 450 people who are, supporting this one thing. And here you are, the one little voice that's coming to say, let me not say little voice, it's a big voice. But here you are, the one voice that is coming to say, this is wrong, or this is not true, and coming to stand on. So that faithfulness is something that we have to have when it comes to serving God, when it comes to speaking out, when it comes to, being bold, being faithful to him, because he's faithful to us, because he's first faithful to us, and knowing that he's going to show up, and knowing that he's going to be there. So that's an awesome story for you guys to go back and read. That's 1 Kings 18. And it's just a testament to show just the power of God, and just in faithfulness, and just trusting in him, trusting in his word, trusting in the assignment that he's given you. Maybe it could seem like a big, great assignment, and it could seem like, the task at hand is impossible, but knowing that he is faithful will help get you through. So those are just two of the stories that you hear about these stories if you grew up in church, but when you read them, I don't know, it hits different. Like when you go back and read them, and you start to see and understand, it's like, wow, I never, you start to get it from a different perspective, and it's easier for you to, apply to your everyday life and apply to what you have going through. And another scripture I was, and I'm not going to stay on here long. I just wanted to come on and just talk about those few things. But another scripture that I was thinking about when we were talking about faithfulness is Matthew 16:4, where it talks about a wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign. So another thing I was thinking too is like, I kept seeing like the word adulterous. And of course, like when we think about adultery, I know it's like such a strong word, strong. But when we think about the word adultery, like typically we're thinking about like cheating and, not having faithfulness in a relationship. So a similar concept, essentially, being adulterous is the lack of faith, the lack of faithfulness. So pretty much, the Bible talks about there's a time where, there's going to be a wicked and unfaithful generation, that are seeking after a sign. And that kind of tied me back into what we were talking about, back when with Baal, and how, all of those people in Israel, had started worshiping other gods. And, Elijah had to do a whole showdown, and God had to answer by fire, just to show them again that he was who he was. But that's why we have to have faithfulness. We have to know that he is who he is. We have to know that he is who he says he is. And just based off of the evidence that we have from the Bible, from family, the evidence that we have from our life, just the goodness and everything that he bestows upon us on a daily basis, that's the evidence that we have to be able to walk faithful. And if we're not faithful to God, it's going to be hard for us to be faithful in relationships and with other people and with situations. And I just want to encourage you today, and just not just encourage, but just cause you to think, what are you being faithful to? Like, what are you faithful to? Like during this moment, are you faithful to your job? Like, are you faithful to your career? Are you faithful to your business? Are you faithful to your purpose? Are you faithful to your organization? Are you faithful to, your church? Like, what is it that you're faithful to? And then are you faithful, in your marriage? Are you faithful in your friendships? And then I want you to think about, now, how is that faithfulness, being acted upon in a relationship with God? Are you being faithful there? Because I know a lot of times in relationship building, we want to be faithful in a relationship, or we want to be faithful to our business. We want to grind and we want to show up for that, but we don't want to but we don't want to, faith without works is dead. So we don't want to put in the work, behind that faith, behind the relationship with God. And I was talking with Taya. She wasn't able to. Hey, Oren. I was talking with Taya, and she wasn't able to get on, but she was talking about just having the fear of God. So I feel like the fear of God also produces faithfulness in your life too, because when you have that fear and knowledge and understanding of him and who he is, it'll cause you to be more faithful. It'll cause you to have that reflection on, okay, how am I being faithful to God versus how am I being faithful to my business? And I feel like a lot of time, especially in our generation, we get so caught up in, now our purpose is God-given, and that's something that we should be faithful in. But I feel like we get so caught up in being faithful to, so many people and so many things and money and ideas, but we forget about our faithfulness to God. So my advice to you is just to do that reflection right now on what are you faithful to, and kind of like rank that, because whatever you're faithful to is, whatever is priority in your life.